Okay, we're recording.
All right. Hello, hello, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to see all of you. I am Sherry Reichert Belul, and I'm author of Say It Now, which is 33 creative ways to say I love you to the most important people in your life. And I am so excited today to have three authors to introduce you to. We have Eileen and Marilyn and Aundrea. Maybe you guys could just all give a little wave and then I'll have you. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your time. And we're just going to start off by having each of you introduce yourselves and tell us the name of your book and where you live. And if you just want to share something, whatever's personal from the heart right now about how you're taking care of yourself right now in this moment of time, how you're finding love and compassion, and whatever's top of mind. And Marilyn, you've got you at the top of the screen, so I'm going to start with you first.
Well, thanks, Sherry. My name is Marilyn Maye. My maiden name was Allman, so I go by Marilyn Allman Maye. And this is the book that I'm one of the co-authors, Seven Sisters and a Brother. So there are 8 of us. And I'm from New York City. I was born and raised in Harlem. I live in the Bronx, where I've lived for the last 40 plus years. And we were, the epicenter of the COVID. I'm sure the whole world knows that the Bronx was at the heart of everything. And so, it's been extremely intense for us. Everyone here knows people who have passed away. Everyone knows somebody who's lost someone. We really had to dig deep. Our churches were all closed down. And then in the midst of that, we were aware that, our community was overrepresented among those who were victims of the virus. So it has really called for everybody to draw deep on our communal resources because we couldn't gather. I have a daily prayer call every morning at 6 o'clock with a group of mostly women. And I thought at the beginning, well, how much can we do this every day? But it's been 12 weeks and, I may have missed 1 or 2 times, but basically there's always something to meditate on, to cry about, to rejoice about, to be thankful about. And it has been a very enriching experience to have that daily prayer call. I couldn't imagine doing that every day under normal circumstances. But it's amazing how much help we've been to each other. So that's been my primary care methodology for this period. It's been very intense. Yeah.
Marilyn, that is so beautiful. Do you mean to tell me are you on the phone every day, or you guys?
Yes, every day, and it's a very consistent number of people that do it, and it's just been extremely helpful. And we have a list of 100 names of people we pray for, first responders that we know, and family members, and there's just so much to think about and so many people to be mindful of, and it's just, we've been doing it consistently, so yeah.
That is beautiful. Thank you. I just feel like that's also just such a beautiful place to start us off, with that idea of this daily community of love is what it sounds like to me.
Exactly.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yeah. And Aundrea, since you're we should probably say this, right? That there are 9 or 8. Why do 8? Yeah. 8 co-authors of the book.
Yes.
Yeah. But why don't you hold it up again, just so any.
Yes, and the whole name of is that backwards?
Okay.
Oh, you know what? I'm trying to read it from. Okay, I understand what I have to do now. 7 Sisters and a Brother: Friendship, Resistance, and Untold Truths Behind Black Student Activism in the 1960s. So that's the full title of the book. And it's really amazing, isn't it, that here we are 50 years later, and the same kinds of battles and issues have risen right back to the forefront. And so I think that our book is really timely in the sense that some of the strategies and lessons that we learned in terms of how to cope then can certainly be applied to the young folks and others who are activists today. So I also find I have my schedule now is structured around my interaction with my church. So on Sundays, I watch two services, one from my church back in Massachusetts and one from the one here in Nevada, where I moved very recently. That was talk about coping, but anyway, I digress. And then I am also part of a life group that meets virtually on Tuesday mornings. And this particular life group is of retirees. Our church is very interesting because there are 54 languages spoken. It's extremely diverse. There are all kinds of colors and so forth. And folks of various persuasions in terms of politically. And this particular life group is of retirees. There are four couples, two sets of Trump supporters and two sets who may or may not be, and then our group leader. So that's really been an interesting experience. I also ended up joining the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, where I joined, I signed up for some courses, including a chorus, learning choral music from various genres. And that has unfortunately been delayed or sidetracked because we couldn't meet anymore. However, starting this Friday, we're going to be doing our rehearsals via Zoom because I love to sing. So and that's basically those are basically some of the ways that I've been able to cope, having those relationships, that community around those life groups and around the chorus, and it's been very helpful, especially as a newcomer to the area.
Yeah. And when did you move?
In December, we moved into our home right during Christmas week. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, so you moved in and then there you were sheltering in place, not that far after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I love already, right? So this emphasis on community, right? And spiritual community, but as well as other, and I love the singing part. That just seems so to me like it would be such a necessary thing right now. And I love that you're going to be able to start to meet again.
So do I. Missed it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Eileen, hello, welcome.
Hello, Sherry. Thank you. So I'm Eileen Campbell, and I'm the author of The Woman's Book of Hope, Meditations for Passion, Power, and Promise. And my experience, it's been fascinating listening, has been very different. And in a way, I've been very blessed, I suspect, because I live in the countryside in the middle of England, way removed from originally London, obviously, was the epicenter. Now it's further north. And actually, I don't know anybody who has died from the virus. I know of a few people, but I haven't personally been affected. So my heart went out to Marilyn in terms of living in the Bronx. That must have been the most extraordinarily difficult experience. And yeah, I feel, that quite extraordinary how you have handled and coped with that. Interesting, Aundrea, your experience. One of the things that I do is I'm a singer. In fact, I study both classical and choral music, Western style, and I also train in classical Indian raga. So music's very important to me. And I didn't think I was going to be talking about music, but obviously I had to pick up on the fact that for you, that's really important. And it's one of the things that I do. I find, it's a fantastic experience to be involved in a choir. I'm actually chair of our choral society, which is 90 strong. And we were about to perform Verdi's Requiem on May the 16th. Obviously, we've been unable to do that. But that was actually combining with two other choirs and the Nottingham Symphony Orchestra, and it would have been an amazing event. I'm not even sure we'll be able to perform it in November, which was our next concert date. But anyway, meanwhile, one has done some singing practice at home, and actually there's been this wealth of resources online, things that you can do in terms of listening and practicing and virtual concerts. So it's just amazing and you know, part of the change that's happening. But in terms of how else I supported myself, it's been, I mean, yoga and meditation is my sort of where I come from. That's my sort of foundation. So that's a daily practice. And the other thing that's very important to me is I'm a very keen gardener. Gardening is therapy. I have quite a large garden and grow all my own fruit and vegetables, which actually is getting increasingly difficult as I get older, the amount of time and effort and energy it takes, but it's very therapeutic. And so I find that that in itself is a meditation, going out into the garden and stopping the mind from chattering and just really caring about the plants and what they need. And that takes you away from kind of obviously all the news that's coming in, the sadness, the anxiety that everyone feels, everyone's touched by it, and of course the implications of it all and what it's actually all part of in terms of the sort of chaos that is the world right now.
Wow, thank you, Eileen. I love the various things that you've brought in, you know, again, the singing and how important that is to the spirit and to the soul, and gardening and meditation and yoga. And it's been to me, one of the most beautiful things about doing these weekly panels, you know, is really getting to know our authors, you know, not just by your book, which of course is really, really wonderful, but also some of those other personal details about just who you are. And, you know, we just have such an amazing community of authors. And I love that piece too, just personally getting just a sense to know who you are. Because typically we, you know, you get a book and you read it, but you don't really always know, you know, those personal details. So I appreciate all of you sharing that. So what we'll do now is go around, and Marilyn, we'll start with you again and just have you, whatever you want. You know, we always promise people we'll share wisdom, you know, wisdom from your book, wisdom from your heart, whatever is top of mind for you that you'd like to share from it, to tell us about you and your book.
Okay, well, I was thinking about, as Aundrea mentioned before, our book is a story of our activism 50 years ago. And I had a 17-year-old just last week who was finally reading the book. And he said he couldn't believe how it was so relevant to what's going on today with the activism of the young people in the community and his own activism that he's been called to this year. And so I was very encouraged by that, because I think we always wanted to know that the next generation would benefit from the book. So that was affirming. And we wrote it in mind that we would share our experience. We would give a human face to what that 60s struggle is, that people kind of hear about it, but they really very rarely meet any of the people who were involved in it and understand who they were as people. So it tells the story of 8 of us, and we're all different, 7 women, 1 man, and we came from the North, the South, we came from the Caribbean, one of our group that was actually born in the Caribbean, others were children of immigrants, we were mostly first generation students. We came very, very naive about what would be required of us going to this elite school in Pennsylvania. For those who are not familiar, it's one of the small Ivies, they call it. And we came very open-minded, I think, Aundrea, we would agree. We didn't come thinking we'd ever be involved in activism, even though we had grown up in the 60s and had seen activism all around us. We didn't anticipate that we would have to meet this. The school was famous for its abolitionist history. And Aundrea reminded me about the movie Harriet, and she worked with people in Pennsylvania who were abolitionists. So it's kind of, young people kind of know about that Harriet Tubman struggle. And so we came there with an open mind, and in a lot of ways, some young people today have been caught by surprise that they have to assert that Black Lives Matter, because they sort of believed, especially in the Obama era, that it was clear to everybody that Black Lives Matter is sort of a sense that we had established this point and we didn't have a struggle. And then we got hit with the backlash, right? In the election of 2016. And we older people were worried about our younger people had they been lulled into a false sense of security But now we see them in the streets and they've been joined by their white counterparts. And that's a new piece, the involvement of the white young people. So we know that some progress has been made. Even though some of the issues are the same, we see that a lot of the white young people are getting it. And one of the things that we think that may be partly explainable is that our struggle for Black studies, you know, was something that we were going against the grain. People were saying there wasn't a need for Black studies, it wasn't legitimate. And we had to really fight because we knew it was important and we knew it was legitimate. And now 50 years later, I think most of the young people, Black or white, have had at least a Black studies course sometime in their undergraduate career, especially in the Northeast. I don't know how it is in the South, but I think there's hardly a college student who hasn't had at least a Black studies course somewhere. And so when they talk about things like white privilege, they're not in denial. They're not saying, what is that? We don't have a racial problem. They're much more informed. And it's because of the fight 50 years ago to make sure that Black studies was available for everybody. And it's not, I don't think it's permeated K to 12 yet, but definitely at the college level, I think young people, and maybe even some of the high school students, they are getting that those books have been written, those researchers have come along. And we take a lot of pride that people now can make a career of studying Black history and recognizing that it informs everybody. So, you know, it's a word of encouragement that these long fights that take such a long time to go through and you don't see a lot of progress, but 50 years later, you can see some very specific things that really have made a difference. And that's encouraging. We hope the next generation will be encouraged to know that these long fights are worth engaging in.
Wow, I don't know if you saw Brenda. By the way, hi Brenda, welcome.
Hi.
Brenda, I love Brenda's. You should be proud. She put a real exclamation points, and it's true. Like it must feel like so wonderful to know, you know, that you did really make you paved the way, right? And I'm curious, Marilyn, before we move on, is there anything from your own personal story in the book that you want to share with us?
Oh, wow. There is so much. I just think that I always say the last thing my parents thought was that I was on scholarship. They were not expecting me to be having a sit-in and putting my education at risk and, you know, being that was the last thing they thought. And it would seem as if my activism came out of nowhere. And then as we wrote the book, one thing we really realized that it was our parents who really set us up to be activists without realizing it, because they modeled for us a steeliness and a resilience, a quiet, calm way of being in the face of adversity that just gave us an inner core of strength. And then when we met our challenge, which was different from the challenges they had had, we had what it took to rise to that challenge. So these things get passed on in ways that is not always obvious. And if you read my chapter about my particular parents, and then you read each one of our parents, you know, there are a lot of very interesting commonalities, especially our fathers all played a role in our lives. So many things that people don't realize. And they created in us something that would prepare us for what they never knew we would face. But you know, it was just what was needed, and we believe that this can be passed forward. Because you don't know what your children are gonna face. So the best you can do is to equip them in terms of their character and their strength, and then they'll be able to deal with what's ahead.
Oh, Marilyn, you know, when you were talking about that, what came up for me is this rush of love for all of these, you know, previous, like when you're talking about your parents, right? Like a rush of love for how, you know, they may not be the voices right at this moment, but what an impact they've had. And I feel like I just want to honor, right? I just want to honor all the ancestors and everyone who's brought us to this. It's so beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Aundrea, do you want to share with us?
Well, you know, I thought one of our co-authors was not able to be part of this call, but she sent a little quote that I'd love to read. that I think it pretty much ties in with what you were just saying, Marilyn. This was co-author Myra Rose. And she says that it seems that each generation has to rediscover for itself the abiding truth that racism and white privilege were fundamental to the founding and perpetuation of America and its ideals. European colonialism derived from this same fabric of white privilege. Perhaps that history explains the concurrence and resonance we have witnessed in the demonstrations around the world. Struggle is hard, but involvement brings a sense of purpose, and it also stokes positive energy. And these are lessons that can be passed down. I wanted to also read a very short quote from my chapter about my father. Marilyn was mentioning the strength that we got from our parents, and then how we can pass down what we've learned to the next generation. So if I could read a very short.
Please, yeah, bring it on.
My father was born in Mississippi, and he went to the military. So as a young Army soldier, Daddy came home on leave to visit my mother in Laurel, Mississippi. He had performed honorably in the frozen tundra of Alaska, where severe frostbite injuries left him with lifelong pain in his legs and hands. I remember Daddy's emotional pain each time he recalled what should have been a triumphant return home to his hometown. An elderly white man sitting in front of a general store stopped the young Jack White, strolling proudly, resplendent in his military uniform. "What's your name, boy?" "I am Sergeant Jack White, sir." I said, "What's your name, boy?" Attempting to accommodate this first confrontation with the past, Daddy responded as a man and looked him in the eye. "My name is Jack White." Not satisfied, the old-timer barked, "Boy, I said, what's your name?" Daddy finally got the message and responded meekly, "Jack." This experience was pivotal to his decision to make his career in the US Army, to do everything in his power to make his country better for all, and to uplift others regardless of their situation or the color of their skin. And he did. He ended up becoming an activist himself. One way, for example, one small example of how he was able to advocate for his colored troops, as they were called in those days, even though he was an officer, and there were several Black officers in the military at that time, they were not allowed to eat at the table. Officially they could, but they were always excluded from the tables with the white officers when there were special events. And so my father's form of activism in this particular instance was to get his soldiers, his troops to come early. And they came in and each one sat at a table. And that meant when the white officers came in, they had to either decide to sit with a Black person at the table or not have any fun at all. So that's an example of how things were at that time. So today, we had a different set of issues. We were articulating on behalf of ourselves within academia, and these young people today are also facing an even bigger, more global struggle. But I think that the lessons, some of those kinds of lessons are helpful for them. I also want to point out that my 15-year-old granddaughter has just been organizing and protesting as well, out in the streets, organizing along with her little friends.
Has she read your book or you chat?
No, she doesn't like to read.
Aha! She knows your story.
she does. This little group doesn't like to read, so they interact with life through this. This is where they read. She does read online, but for some reason she doesn't like the book.
I feel like at some point she's going to reach that age where she will read it, and you know, I'm just projecting the amount of huge pride, right, in knowing, like, wow, you know, to know that you did that. Yeah.
So battling the systemic racism is something that's happened. This is the third time that I'm aware, in my lifetime, my father, then us, our generation, and now my granddaughter's generation. But it's hopeful that they have a sense of purpose, and that purpose brings positive, or it stokes positive energy.
Yeah. I loved that quote. I loved when you read that. And it's the perfect transition, Eileen, right? Because your book is about hope, right? And I feel like, I don't know what you would like to share with us, but it just seems like that would be a wonderful transition point.
Well, I think it's interesting talking about the young and talking about protest, because I think we're going to see more protests. And I think there's lots of things coming together, because the other thing is there is, tremendous inequality, in terms of economics and the amount of wealth that there is in the world, and the fact that a very small percentage of people own that wealth, and the rest of the world is living in comparative poverty. Although it is hopeful, because there are signs that poverty has been decreasing over the last few decades, but still, there's injustice in the world. Things don't seem to change, and yet actually listening to Aundrea and Marilyn, I find it very interesting, because it's a little bit like, if you think about it, the environmental protests as well, because we've had these waves of them, and they're getting stronger. It's the same with feminism. There've been various waves of feminism. So the injustice is endemic in the world, as it were. And I think that what's happening is this groundswell of voices now who want to be heard. And I think it was interesting to hear about, building on the ancestors, as it were, and their contribution. And the whole thing is unfolding, and it's now reaching almost like a crescendo. I think, sadly, we're going to, one of the side effects of coronavirus is going to be the economic problems we're going to face, and perhaps a huge rise in unemployment. And that's going to contribute and feed into the amount of dissatisfaction and grief and hurt that people will be feeling. So hope is an interesting topic in a way, because you can say, well, let's turn it on its head. Hope is an antidote to despair. People are angry, they're anxious, they're depressed, and actually, how can they find hope? But despair never achieves anything. And so hope, as long as there's life, there is hope. And, there have been horrendous experiences. My book is full of stories, both in history and sort of not particularly well-known people, but people who've triumphed over adversity. And so in my book, The Woman's Book of Hope, it's really putting together inspiration from these stories of different people from the past who have suffered, and yet, against all odds, have gone on to serve, to achieve great things, and be a force for good in the world. So ultimately, I'm an optimist. I think we are living in extraordinary times of change and challenge, and it's very necessary for things to change, and for the good of all, because we're not getting the leadership, or maybe we are getting the leadership we deserve, I don't know. We seem to be lacking leadership, maybe because we're not engaged enough, I don't know, but people distrust politics and political leaders. People want a different kind of world, a different kind of way of being. And I think one of the things about coronavirus that has been interesting is that, in a way, we've had lots of wake-up calls. We've had calls for change time and time again. We say, what can we learn from this? And yet we you know, we're very slow to learn until actually enough people perhaps become engaged, and it's that critical mass. When you reach a certain level, then maybe, you know, we can make this giant leap forward and things can happen very quickly. I don't know, but I feel that, you know, we have to hang on to hope. We have to make hope a choice that, you know, we make, and we have to exercise it like it's a muscle. You know, we have to keep working at it and be positive and envision a future that is different and that works for everybody.
Wow. Yeah. Eileen, I so appreciate that, especially, you know, that last sentence you just said, you know, to have the hope to envision a world, you know, that is what we really all want. And I'm curious, are there lessons to be learned? I'm sure there are, of course, but that come to your mind right away from some of the people in your book who did overcome the odds. You know, like, I think we're at a moment where so many of us want this leap to happen, right? Like, are there any that come to your mind of like what we can really learn about that?
Do you mean to give an example of
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I can take, it's full of people from history. You know, Harriet Tubman is a classic example. Marie Curie, you know, is an interesting one because she had to combat sexism, and you know, she ultimately struggled. She had a terribly difficult time and trying to get funding, and she had jealousy from her male colleagues, but ultimately, you know, she went on to win the Nobel Prize twice. I mean, there's people like Joni Eareckson Tada, who comes to mind just as someone, you know, who had this terrible accident when she was diving into a pool one day when she was a young girl, had everything to live for, she felt, and couldn't come to terms with the fact that after that, you know, she was severely disabled. But she turned the whole thing around. She, you know, she got very depressed, obviously, as one would when you see just everything being lost. And then basically, you know, she saw the light one day and felt that, yes, you know, that just because, you know, I've lost the use of my legs and whatever, there's still things I can do. So she taught herself to do all sorts of things, to paint, to sing, and has written many books, and, you know, wonderful inspiration. There's ordinary, obviously there's lots of people, rags to riches stories, people like Oprah Winfrey, you know, will be very familiar to you all in terms of, you know, her story. But there's also people that, you know, from in my own life, a young friend who, whose partner committed suicide, and how she found that very difficult, as one would, and to try and understand why it had happened, and obviously felt guilt, even though it wasn't to do with her. It was actually, in the end, with financial problems, but she carries that guilt with her that she didn't know about it, and she couldn't help. But as a result of being very depressed, she then decided that she would, well, she was very brave. She spoke about the, you know, the mental torment that she was suffering at a conference, and has gone on to train, to counsel and help others. And I think this is always the thing that one realizes, that these experiences that people have that are so tough, that they come through them and they're actually stronger. And then what they want to do is to ensure that, you know, they can make a difference in terms of other people's lives. And so, you know, very often something happens, somebody sets up a charity to do good work in somebody's name, you know, as a way of honoring their memory. And the book is full of examples of people who've been involved in very difficult situations, and yeah, come through, and they feel stronger, and they then want to do something to help others.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I feel as if, you know, what's coming up for me right now and hearing all of you, I mean, that's what books do, right? Like, so all of you being willing to share your stories, that's a way of offering back, you know, to really help other people and to help us see what's possible. And Yaddyra, I'm just wondering, I just felt compelled to ask you if you wanted to jump into the conversation, being the editor and I'd love to hear what you had to say about this.
Yeah, you know, it's a really strange thing to admit as an editor, because it's, you know, you get a manuscript, and if you're doing developmental editing, which is just helping the authors to shape the manuscript, that it's your job. And so you're supposed to be doing it dispassionately, and being objective. And so this was an experience in which, you know, in reading the different stories, because all 8 of the authors tell a little bit of their story, leading back to their childhood and what took them to Swarthmore prior to the sit-in, that you feel like you're walking with them through each of these individuals through their lives, and to see some of the challenges, and sometimes the difficulties, and then to see that they were able to band together and do something. There were times when I you know, I became emotional reading this, and that's why I say that just being able to see all the different places that they came from, to see all the different types of parenting and the lessons that they were learning in their different regions of the country and the world, and to see that then they came together, that there was a time in which they didn't know each other, and then they found each other in school and were able to make a change. I mean, I think that's the thing that stuck with me the most, is that they came together to make this change, to be able to get Black studies into Swarthmore, and then to get the hiring of more faculty and staff, and also to actually the thing that really struck out to me was that they knew the Black staff members, so people that worked the grounds and people that worked in the cafeteria, and that they were able to form bonds with a lot of the staff members. To me, it was like they were a surrogate family, and to see that they weren't addressed with respect, because back home an elder was addressed with respect. It was, you know, Mr. Smith or something like, and that's something, you know, I learned in my family as well, that you do not call someone who you consider an elder by their first name. Yeah. And that they weren't afforded that respect, that they weren't, you know, and they fought, that was one of the things that they fought for, and were able to make a difference there. So
yes, I can.
That's something that stuck with me too in these last few days.
Right. Thanks, Yaddyra. I just wanted to just mention the word collaboration, because we kind of started with that as a support strategy. I think that's a theme throughout our whole book, and I'm glad you mentioned, Yaddyra, that, you know, people say, how did 8 people write a book? You know, didn't you all want to kill each other by the end of it? And, you know, one of the things that we just have always worked collaboratively, and people kept asking, who's the leader? And we just, that was not our idea about leadership. We had a very strong organization, but it was always a collaboration, and that we weren't looking to identify a particular leader. It was very frustrating to the media and people who wanted to kind of force that on us and target it. And I noticed a lot of the young people out in the Black Lives Matter and in the media, you're not seeing a lot of leaders being put up to be the leader of the movement. And I think it's interesting that the young people today they have much more technology to help them work in a decentralized way. But I think that the collaboration is a strategy that has worked very well for us. And, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there. The book is, you know, it's 8 authors, and we worked on it, as Yaddyra said, you know, collaboratively all the way through. And it was the friendship and the trust that we developed. So even when someone feels that in themselves they couldn't do something, they couldn't accomplish something, in a group, in a collaboration of people of like minds and commitment and trust, you know, there's probably no limit to what you can accomplish. I think that's a theme that will be shown throughout reading our book. I just want to emphasize.
I'm so glad you added that in. How beautiful, you know, almost it feels like a prescription, you know, right now, you know, like, thank you. I'd really love to know, for anybody who's here, and it can be to any of our authors or anyone else who's here, you know, would you like to jump in? Do you have questions for our authors? Yeah, Marlena. Hi.
I just needed to unmute myself. Aundrea and Marilyn, thank you so much. Thank you for your activism in the 60s, and thank you for this incredibly timely book that you've written. Should make you very, very proud. Aundrea, I'm curious what your thoughts might be about what seems like maybe there was a skip generation. There was the generation of your father, your own generation, and now your sweet 15-year-old. Was there something about the generation of your daughter that was in some ways a skip generation in terms of activism, or how do you think about that?
That's a very good point, and it's my son, actually. She's my son's daughter, but he was also an activist, but in a different way, because he was into the arts. He used art and the performing arts in order to get messages across. He would also write letters, write letters to the editor. He also was involved in marches and so forth. So I thank you for pointing that out. I'd forgotten about him. When you're a grandmother, the grandchildren become...
Oh, I know all about that. I do.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi there. Aundrea Marilyn, I'm addressing you partially because of your comments about community of faith. I'm in southern Florida, closer to the Everglades than I am to the ocean. And the various communities of faith here really gotten together. Muslim, Jew, Christian, and my own rabbi is involved in it. And there's a lot of, we talk about praying communities, and it's just a spiritualism that's going on. It doesn't have to be founded, doesn't have to have a foundation in any of the faiths. It could be, let me turn this on, it's better. It could be yoga, it could be, but there's a lot of kindness. And I live in a senior community with about 9,000 residents here in western suburb of Fort Lauderdale. And the president of the community said what's coming out is either people are being really bad or they're being really good. And there's a lot of kindness going on and really caring for people that I'm seeing, which is really positive. In my own synagogue, we had a woman who was on the board. Her 30-year-old daughter died. It was COVID-19. They put something else on the death certificate. And then another couple, they have a son he was on CNN. He spent 6 weeks in ICU in Georgia because he was diagnosed as having a cold. And by the time he was diagnosed, and he's having a lot of problems. And the reason I bring it up is that there were communities throughout the United States of all denominations who were praying for the child. And I'm not overly religious, but there's something about a connectivity that people have that I think is really good. And by the way, Aundrea, I lecture for OSHA down here in Florida. And where are you located?
Henderson, Nevada, but Las Vegas, Nevada.
Okay, Nevada, because I'm down here. I have a friend who taught there. Anyway, but they've opened up through doing lectures for it, and there are programs that some of the OSHAs are actually opening up to allow people to communicate on Zoom. But it's an interesting time where there is a sense of community because we're all in this, well, we should feel we're all in this together. And as far as skipping a generation, I think it depends on where you are in life and in location. My kids were raised in Manhattan and Greenwich Village. Activism never stopped. They were raised with it. I was raised with it, and you've got to be taught. and it's your parents that'll teach you to say, okay, to speak up. I think we just need to speak up. When people make what they consider to be a stupid comment, you got to speak up. You can't let it go. And I have a friend, Coleman Domingo. I don't know, Coleman, not any relationship to Jeanette. Coleman's an actor. He did the Nat King Cole Lights Out show on Broadway. And he spoke out this morning. He named names about the reviewers that were pretty racist. And he said, I'm not just going to sit here with my mouth closed anymore. So I think we have to learn to speak up, do it from a place of love, but not be silent anymore. So that's it.
You can kind of see that in these marches with all of these signs. I saw one that was very encouraging. It said, Su lucha es mi lucha. Your struggle is my struggle. Is that right, Yaddyra? I'm not a Spanish speaker. So that it's very encouraging that more and more people are adopting a sense of community, even though we are all separate. But this whole tragedy has brought people together.
Rachel.
One of the things I appreciate so much is people who are doing testimonials to tell their stories, whether it be in a memoir or on Facebook Lives, because it's when we can feel a person's humanity, it changes things. It's different. It's not just a number. It's not just a statistic. It's not just a group. It's you're connecting through feeling. And I think it makes such a big impact when we can feel the humanity in each other, when all those walls are broken down to be able to listen with open ears. And I know I've really appreciated, I've listened to so many stories from way different perspectives of truth on the subject. And I notice what I attach to, and I attach to the people who talk about themselves. They don't project out into those all categories, because that's where people, I feel like, lose humanity, is when you talk in categories of all. But when they're telling their story from their feeling, it just has such a huge impact on connection, and that's one of the things I love about memoirs and people who tell their stories, is because you can truly connect. And I think that's what it's about, is seeing the humanity in each other. So knowing it's our struggle together, because it's through the story that we find that out. That's what's been helping me see the bigger picture of everything.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Rachel, because I know I just had a conference like this from my church on Sunday night, and we have a large Black immigrant population in the Northeast Bronx. And so ironically, we find that very often Black immigrants are not as knowledgeable about African Americans as one would think they might be. And even though they suffer the same fate at the hands of the police, when they do have those encounters, very often they don't have a lot of knowledge about African Americans for various reasons, some of which were intentional divisions that were placed between the Blacks who are here and the Blacks from the diaspora. But one of the things that I've always stressed is, one of the reasons why people don't understand that Black lives matter is because they don't know Black people. They don't know any Black lives, really. It's just a label for them, or somebody who feels a distance, but they haven't got to know a Black person well, or if a Black immigrant hasn't known an African American has never really had any intimate relationship with a Black immigrant, or a white person doesn't know a Black person. So again, these stories help. And I talked a lot about education, the need to read and know the history of Black people in this country and globally. And I think that's why I think Black Studies was such an important part, more than we even knew when we were fighting for it. But if you have a doubt as to the worth of what Black people bring to this country and Black people have contributed, when you read the stories, of the historians that have written these wonderful stories about that we never knew. George, the young woman that was a slave, had been made a slave by George Martha Washington on the judge, her story. When you read the research that has been done to come up with these stories, that we never knew about these people in history, and the Hemings family with Thomas Jefferson and all of that. There's so much to know now. And when you read the history, you're so much better informed. You don't have to be told that Black Lives Matter because you have knowledge of Black lives. You can name people. It's not just Dr. King and Rosa Parks, because that's all the kids are told in 1 month a year. Dr. King and Rosa Parks, like they're the only two Black people that most kids learn about till they get out of high school, right? But when you read deeply and richly into Black history, you will know that Black Lives Matter. And I think the ignorance in the country is, in addition to hate, it is, they go together, the hate and the ignorance is a big root of the problem that we're facing. So I agree with Rachel, what you're saying. It's really important for us to read and get to know people.
Yeah. My minor in school was cultural anthropology. So I went to the root.
My major.
Yeah.
That was my major. And when I teach programs at Osher and other universities here, other programs, I always do it from a cultural anthropology perspective.
Yep. That was so impactful to me because it's the story. It's the whole story. I mean, you're getting the whole, I loved it because human development was my major. So it was like they went together so well, to see how it moved. So, but that's, it's so important. It's so important.
Well, you mentioned about skipping generations. I think many people I'm going to be 72. And I have found many people of my generation have no knowledge. Not only don't they have a knowledge of Black history, they probably never met a Black person growing up. I grew up in the projects. I'm proud of that. That was great. I'm from the projects of New York. And they actually did a program on it. They did a documentary where I lived, where it was, I'm not saying colorblind. I don't like that term. People were aware of other people's struggles, but we lived together. We had one thing in common. We had nothing. So we struggled together. There was a bond because we didn't have anything. But I have met people who didn't have one Black person in their class, didn't have one Jewish person in their class, never met a Latino person until they were, and there's no knowledge. And as far as the history goes, it skipped them. They just never got it. You might have installed a program, I was at NYU, we had programs, you had one at Swarthmore, other schools, but most of the people I know have no clue, absolutely no clue. So, unfortunate.
What's hopeful is that that's changing now. I think
Yes.
because of the ubiquitousness of all of the media attention and all of the videos and all of the discussions like this
Yay,
one.
technology, right? Well, my son runs a program. He unfortunately works for the Department of the Treasury, but which he tells me stories you don't want to know. But his avocation is music, and he runs a program called DC Music Review. And at first he had pulled back from doing anything because he said, I just don't want to feel like it's white privilege. Ended up collaborating, the community in Washington, the music community collaborated. And he's been overseeing it, and they had a whole segment of the march that was music. It was fantastic, dancing and music playing. So that you're seeing collaboration. And I think that's important.
I love that word has come up like so strongly today.
I think that's a strong word. I think it's important.
And it's, we only have a couple more minutes left, and I think it just feels important to me to thank Mango Publishing, because I feel as if they've allowed for this kind of collaboration, right? For us to just bring in authors and all of these different kinds of books that speak to so many important places in the world. And I just feel so grateful, and that you took the time, right? So that our authors took the time to be here today, because I know you have a lot of places you could be, you have a lot of things you could all be doing, but that you took the time to be here in order to share your stories. And I love what Rachel said, and I feel like that's, again, such a part of all of this is we get to meet the authors. You know, we get to hear your stories. Granted, not enough. You know, I wish we had more time, but I just wanted to express great gratitude to our authors for being here, and to the rest of you who came to share and to contribute and participate. I'm feeling really grateful. And Debbie, thank you for all of your work pulling this together.
And thank you, Sherry, for the technology help us. That was a big help.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And what I wanted to just say is that we will be posting the replay on the Mango Facebook page, and we have a store where our authors' books are, so you can go there and purchase the books, which would be wonderful, and to read more of the stories of Eileen and Aundrea and Marilyn. And so we're here every Wednesday. Hope to see you guys again. Thank you.
You all very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Great seeing all of you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.